Coming up on this episode of Nothing to Bring,
we talk about Sarah's feathers, the Southport Inquiry, the Fonagy review, and our children's needs.
I'm Matt Morris.
I'm Sarah Johnson, and we have
Nothing to Bring.
What I like about that is, despite the fact that we've been doing it every week for about 5 episodes, I still have to write it down.
Yep. Although that's new, the way we're doing it now.
Well, the way we're doing it now is new. New, special, different, excellent.
Yeah. We only started it last episode, and it's cleaner. But yeah, I feel like we're going to have to write it down for you for the next, 10 episodes. This is episode 11, by the way.
Is it episode 11? No.
Yeah. So we've been doing this since just before Christmas of 2025. And we're on to episode 11. And we've had a few guests along the way. So we're still here. We're going to carry on bothering people for some time to come.
And actually, the good thing about education, is it a good thing? That there's always news about education. So you've always got something to talk about.
There is. Although I do worry that the people that we know who do listen to this are only in it for the geeky bit at the start. They're not in it for the education bit that follows.
Well, because it's often your geeky bit, Matt, I brought my own geeky stuff in this folder. So,
well, and I fear this might be a little bit visual, so we're going to have to describe.
This is going to be incredibly visual. So for those that are just listening, to let you know, in my hands, and my perfectly manicured hands, I have basically a scrapbook. And if I were to open up my scrapbook, which I'm going to do now, and show it to the people watching, I have a number of feathers stuck onto a page. And the feathers belong to Basil, which is my mum's parrot, African grey parrot. And the book kind of goes along with different feathers that I found or have been gifted to me by different people. Things from cockatiels, for example, things that I found in woodland, such as magpies, wood pigeon, jays, and so on. And this is my whole booklet that I've been collecting over some time now. Probably not long before we started doing our podcast, actually. And most recently, I went to Kazakhstan this week, and there was a budgerigar bird that they had as one of their kind of pets, animals of the school. So they dropped a feather, so I robbed that up. Had to translate into Russian because this woman didn't speak any English. I collect feathers. Do you mind if I have that feather? Which she was very pleased that Google Translate worked enough, because I was just pointing randomly at a feather, and it was very confusing. But I've also been to Dungeness this weekend, which I believe is the only desert in the UK. I haven't. Is it
classed as a desert?
It's classed as a desert, yeah, because of lack of rainfall there.
Wow.
There we are. I bring facts.
Yeah.
But you don't know anything about Kent, because you didn't know that there were...
Look, I lived in Kent for half my
scorpions.
Life.
Yes.
I didn't know about the scorpions that were around the corner from where I lived. I didn't know, in fact, this is one for another time perhaps, I didn't know that there was a whole place, I think it's called Dead Man's Island, which is just off the coast of where I used to live, where in the ago there were prison ships, and when people on board those prison ships died, they would throw them out, the bodies out onto Dead Man's Island, and so it goes. There are bodies buried in the silt and the mud there, which occasionally get exposed.
They do.
You're not allowed out. You're not allowed to go.
This worries me, what you did in primary school. Surely you did a project which was all local history.
We did, but what we did, we did a project about Sir Robert Shurland.
I've never heard of Sir Robert Shurland.
Okay, so there are many famous stories. This one's really, I'll give you this really quick. So the story goes that Sir Robert de Shurland, he overheard I'm going to get this completely wrong and people could correct this, but my memory back 40 odd years ago, I've made myself sound younger than I am there, is that Sir Robert de Shurland, Sir Robert de Shurland overheard 2 priests who he thought were conspiring against the king, and he killed them. On realised he committed this cardinal sin, he wants forgiveness from the king. He's on his horse. Now this is where I should know the name of the horse, but he's on his horse on the seafront, on the coast.
Bob. Horse is called Bob.
It's not, no, it's actually got a name, and the name's relevant to the story. But anyway, he sees the king's ship not far from the coast at sea, and on his horse, on horseback, swims out to the ship to beg for the king's forgiveness, climbs aboard the ship, the king grants forgiveness, and he gets back on the horse and swims back out to the coast.
How does he get back on the horse? What, the horse is just in the water chilling out?
Yeah, the horse is just treading. This is one of those stories that over time has changed and moulded.
Can't imagine a horse just being
the legend.
Near the ship, because you can't swim near boats anyway.
I think you're thinking too much. I think it's more of an allegory, this story, than it is an actual complete representation. Anyway, the story goes that made it back to land, but the horse, absolutely exhausted, was at death's door, so he kills the horse to put it out of its misery.
Brilliant.
Okay, leaves the horse on the beach. We're studying this in primary school, by the way. Let's just, even though I'm getting some of the bits, we studied this in primary school. Leaves the horse on the beach and leaves it to the elements. Years later, again, so the story goes, he is walking along the same beach and he kicks into something with his foot. The thing he kicks into pierces his foot.
Good.
And leaves him with a wound, leaves him with an infection, blood poisoning, and over time, over a short period of time, he actually dies from the poisoning, the infection in his foot.
So
the
thing
horse he kicked
protected
was
him.
The horse's skull.
Obviously. But I think that's reasonable. The horse has swam to a boat, waited for him like a dutiful horse, and then it just gets a bit tired and he kills it. So actually, I'm kind of okay with him getting his comeuppance.
Well, so that's the story. That's the story as we learnt it at school. Grey Dolphin. I knew it in my head. I knew it was Grey Dolphin. Grey Dolphin is the name of the horse.
That's a stupid.
But I think the horse has been retrospectively named.
Dolphin spelled as in DOLPHIN.
PHIN, yeah.
Yeah.
As in a dolphin. Yeah.
What a ridiculous story. You could have learned about Dead Man Island. Okay,
so to try to mitigate from my really poor factual, I'm just going to read I think the thing is it's one of those stories that has adapted over time, not necessarily a true story, but this is it. So there's a story about Sir Robert's death. The story goes, Sir Robert killed a monk and wanted to ask the king for a pardon. He rode to where the king's ship was anchored off the Isle of Sheppey, that's where we're talking about, and gained forgiveness. Returning, he met a witch who said that his horse, Grey Dolphin, which had borne him so bravely to the ship, would be the death of him. Sir Robert immediately killed the horse and cut off his head. A year later, Sir Robert was walking along the shore when a shard of the horse's bone pierced his foot. Blood poisoning set in and Sir Robert died. I mean, I was fairly accurate. I just missed out the witch.
You weren't bad. I mean, yeah, and witches are pretty important. But it goes to that. It feels very Macbeth as a story, doesn't it? That
absolutely.
You're warned about something, and then in order to not heed that warning, you do all different things, and you get killed anyway because of your actions. You can't.
Yeah, so we didn't learn about Dead Man's Island, which is a real thing, because we learned about Sir Robert de Shurland, and a story which has nuances to it which have probably been exaggerated over time. There you go.
There you go.
Welcome to History Corner. We had Poetry Corner last time.
Poor History Corner, can I add?
Hey, come on, this is the Isle of Sheppey. There were some amazing things. I mean, I could tell you the other story that I was told over time, which is, so Shurland Hall, which is this big old mansion, which is in ruins. I think work's been done to it now to bring it back to its former glory. I've not seen it yet, and I don't go back to Sheppey. I don't go back to that part of Sheppey.
You're not allowed to. There's been a whole vote.
Once you have the webbing taken out from between your fingers, it's difficult to return.
Come on.
I'm from Sheppey. I'm allowed to say these things, okay? So Shurland Hall is this old hall in ruins for years and years, and there are lots of ghost stories associated with it. So there are loads of sightings, particularly about Lady Shurland, who there's thought roams the site. So yeah, you see, we did all the kind of the myths and legends bit.
When
actually we didn't talk about the real gritty, dirty history that's actually there. Or the scorpions.
Yeah. I don't think the scorpions have been there that long, though, so you're forgiven for not doing it.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got there because of my lack of knowledge of the history of Kent, and you went to Dungeness, which I've been to. I've been to Dungeness a number of times.
It's a desert. Yeah, it's I've been there twice now for a kind of weekend away. It's really enjoyable. Went to a really nice restaurant called Snack Shack. God, that's difficult to say.
Snack Shack.
Yeah, really good. Did like these kind of halloumi on flatbread, and it was really tasty. So I'd like to recommend that, a little shout out, and maybe they'll listen to us because I've done a shout out. Really good food, and wasn't cheap, but it's very well made, and it was really nice.
Dungeness it's been a place that draws in quite famous people.
Does it?
Because lots of famous people have had huts there. Because there's all those kind of weird black beach huts, aren't there?
Yeah, well, they're all painted all different colours. The ones near where I was, I mean, maybe there's black ones elsewhere, but the ones that I walked past, I had some nice walks, were all quite colourful, quite traditional looking, colourful.
Did you go down to the lighthouse?
Yeah, we saw lighthouses. I think there's more than one as well. So yeah, quite
See,
nice. Walk along
you're
the
right.
beach.
My memory of the history of Sheppey and its geography is as bad as your geography of the rest of the UK.
We had this conversation last week.
We did.
But saying that, I was in Bedfordshire today. I'm travelling to the Isle of Wight tomorrow for a couple of days to do school improvement work. Friday, I think I'm back home, but it's been a lot of travelling, so I'm feeling quite tired. So last week, I was in Kazakhstan and my plane landed just after 6 and I was working in a school at 8 a.m. in the morning, bearing in mind I've travelled all night. So I was absolutely shattered.
Famous Dungeness residents. Filmmaker Derek Jarman, known for its stark beauty, has drawn creatives like Tilda Swinton and David Hockney, and it has recently been revealed that Ed Sheeran has a hideaway in the area.
What more do we want then?
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those places that's really quirky and
it's got
different.
Some really interesting houses that have been built on the beach, or set, just by the beach. It's really quite lovely. I'm thinking we've spoken 14 minutes about stuff and things.
Stuff and Things. That's what we should call this section. Stuff and things. Brought to you by the Nothing to Bring podcast team. Oh, before you do that, I've coined a phrase.
What's your phrase?
Well, I've coined a term. It's the term for us, but it's also a term for fans of this podcast, of which there are 5, and they are the non-bringers.
The non-bringers. Absence of bringing.
Yeah, there you go. So are we going to swiftly move on to education then?
Not quite education, but sort of education periphery, perhaps. And it's a more upsetting story. People remember the 3 little girls killed at Taylor Swift dance class in 2024 by a 17-year-old who had been on the radar of multiple agencies for years. There is the Southport Inquiry Phase 1, and it was published on the 13th. We're now the 27th of April. There were 67 recommendations. 67 is a huge amount. Across policing, social care, education, healthcare, prevent and online harms. Phase 2 of the inquiry will examine children drawn into extreme violence. Some kind of key facts about the case is that the murderer, just going to call him murderer for simplicity, had contact with Lancashire Police, 5 call-outs, the multi-agency safeguarding hub, children's social care, early help, children's mental health services, prevent was 3 referrals and youth offending team. And yet he was still able to commit such crimes. And obviously there's lots about agency failure. So Colin Diamond said it was an inappropriate merry-go-round of estate agencies. The Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel de Souza, clear opportunities were missed to stop these 3 little girls being killed. NSPCC named concern about how autism functioned in the case, excusing harmful behaviour on the account of the presence of autism. Gosh. Unsurprisingly, the ADCS, which is the Directors of Children's Services, said there's an urgent need for a joined-up partnership approach to sharing information. And I think what I find frustrating about this, there's nothing new here, that there's no inquiry that says that communication has run really well and agencies had really joined-up thinking. And I think what's incredibly upsetting is, obviously, at the end of this awful situation, 3 girls have died, been killed. And schools see children for about 190 days a year, obviously bearing in mind that they might be absent and things like that. Other agencies might only see them for an hour. And why is the safeguarding architecture built around the agencies that children see the least? But then it goes back to your point that you made several times in this programme, that schools become the kind of, everything fits. We see them all the time. We must do X, Y, Z. But also, there was 3 prevent referrals. So I'm assuming that the school has made the referrals and he still slipped through. So what does that tell us about thresholds in terms of early help, social care, prevent referrals? And actually, where's that professional curiosity that's relevant to any kind of designated safeguarding leads that are listening to this? And I think we've all come to that frustration where we referred, and we're told it doesn't meet threshold. And I've stopped for a second, and you can keep that pause in terms of the podcast, because it is so frustrating that actually there are opportunities for children not to be hurt, and for some reason we miss them and we ignore them. More of a serious conversation, but it's one I think worthy of having.
Yeah, and to take up the point, because I do say it often, I do say that teachers have become the world police. And I know that sounds kind of flippant, and there is a broader point there, though, that teachers do have to pick up a lot of the ills of society or respond to some of those things. However, just to go back to the point, there was the phrasing that I had an issue with was teachers see them 190 days, but there are other commitments in there. So in amongst those other commitments, whilst we might see children quite a lot of the time, we've got other things to do. They're not coming to us. They're not coming to us for us solely to safeguard them. They are coming to us for education, and we safeguard them whilst they are there. That's the important thing to remember. I will defend the position, though, which is that whilst they're coming to us 190 days a year, we are the ones who are championing those children. We are the ones that are raising the issues. We are the ones that are highlighting the problems. We are the ones who are banging on the doors to get the right things done and the right people to see those children. And the frustration, as you put it, is getting people to take you, not seriously, I think you are taken seriously as a teacher when you raise issues about a child, but getting people to respond or to recognize just how challenging an issue that might be or where the threshold has been met. Because sometimes it's difficult to even argue the threshold with some agencies. And that's where the frustration lies. We're talking here about something really, really serious where teachers have, and correct me if I'm wrong, in this case, teachers have raised concerns. There have been prevent referrals made around the young person who has carried out these atrocities, and they have somehow slipped through the net.
But the thing is, it's almost like they haven't slipped through the net because people were expressing concerns over and over again. There does need to be conversations about the parents because apparently there was missed opportunities for the parents to not get involved. So, for example, we had a machete in his room that they knew about. They prevented him leaving the week before because they were concerned about what he was doing, but yet they allowed him to go out that day armed. And it's the fact that he's so young as well, that he's 17 and he's a product of our communities and culture or something. You know, what has gone fundamentally wrong for a child to kill other children? Because he still is a child, even if he's 17. In my eyes, he's a child.
And I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, or as my wife calls it,
we both
crime.
do, don't we?
Yeah, and we both listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and I've picked up listening to a couple again recently on my car journey. One of the debates that often gets explored in those podcasts is what it is that is the point that tips people over. And often it's the case that you can look at trauma, history, all the things that have affected people in their lives that get them to the point they're at where they behave in that way. But and again, I don't know the background to, I tend to shy away from stories like this because I find it too close to home.
Yeah, it's too upsetting.
Because it's upsetting and it's young people, and I work with young people all the time, and I know it's real, but I almost don't want to know backstory of a person who's committed these atrocities because I don't want it to feel like it could happen somewhere near me, even though with safeguarding, the very thought that we have as teachers is it could happen here.
Happen here, and it will happen
and
here.
It will happen here. But is there any kind of trauma? Is there any historical backstory to this that suggests how this young person came to be in a position where their mind led them to attack those young girls?
I'm not sure if that's even a good enough, I'm going to use the word excuse. You know, there's lots of people that suffer quite significant trauma and they still don't behave in ways like that. You know, and I'm one of those people. I suffered, inordinate trauma. It doesn't mean that I would enact violence upon those around me or target people. And I think there's something, so I think his parents were originally from Rwanda. So there might be intergenerational trauma, certainly, because his parents would have probably come during the atrocities in Rwanda, potentially, or seen things. But he's a product of our society. He lived and was, I believe, born in England. There's conversations about actually a lot of his behaviour was dismissed because of his diagnosis of autism. The NSPCC says autism is not a defence for harm, alongside autism is a real and underserved need. And there has been conversations about being autistic being a kind of flag in terms of violence. I've been here and a few kind of reports in the last couple of years, people not sure how to respond to that. But just because you're autistic, clearly it doesn't mean you're going to cause such a horrendous harm. And there's lots of conversations about being autistic and being over empathetic as well. So, actually it being the opposite almost. But this person
goes back to what you've just said about about trauma. Just because people have experienced trauma doesn't mean they go out and commit atrocities, crimes, harm towards others. Just because people have autism, again, that's not a reason. And it's similar to this debate that's on running and has been for decades about images and the media and how, people enact the things they see, and the research shows that's just not true. It's a combination of many factors that often leads people to do things like this. Do you think, though, that just going back to the autism, just going back to the special needs, do you think that that's true? Do you think that autism, special education needs, has become the excuse for things like this? We hear this a lot. Every time, I say every time, I'm generalizing, but quite often we hear about someone who has taken a gun or taken a knife to people, and the very next word that come out is mental health.
Greg Wallace, I think, is a great example of this, actually. Greg Wallace went, I've behaved in such a way because I'm autistic. And you think, oh, for goodness sake, why are you excusing your poor sexual behaviour on being autistic? That is totally unreasonable. And I think people trying to excuse their behaviour through a diagnosis is appalling, but also...
You behave that way because you wanted to.
Yeah.
Because you chose to.
You made a choice to be sexually inappropriate. You made a choice. You know, and you knew, and you were told that it isn't appropriate behaviour. And actually, it just feels like... And then the autistic community are in a position where they have to kind of say, well, not everyone with autism. He was in a great position of being autistic and being on primetime TV. Why don't you behave in a good way and actually, fly the flag for autism rather than acting like an absolute pillar?
Absolutely. If you've got that opportunity, use it. Because did we know that he had autism before
No, it came
this
out
happened?
afterwards. But it's like...
So put it up front. You've got a platform. Put it up front. Be honest and open about it.
So I've got Tourette's syndrome. And one of the things that's really important to me is other girls in particular, not other girls because obviously I'm a woman, sort of girls have a good sense of just because you have Tourette's, it doesn't mean it stops you from doing X, Y, Z. So I do free talks to schools in assemblies and things like that if they have autistic females in the audience. And I talk about it. And I say, that I'm an author, that I'm doing really well, that I've got children, I've got a family, I've travelled the world, and so on, despite having Tourette's syndrome. Because that's really important, that actually they see those kind of... I'm not going to call myself a role model because I think that's a bit up myself, but someone who's modelling what it can do, what you can be, irrespective of having Tourette's syndrome. And
what I'd say of you is you're always... You're quite upfront with things like that. In fact, you're quite upfront with a lot of things. You're upfront about Tourette's. You're upfront about mental health. You're upfront about past trauma. And yet you are a successful female, both in academia and also as a published author and as a consultant. And you come to it as a package of the things that you represent. You don't shy away from that. I remember that we talked about this and we've joked about this. You said, for the podcast, I'm not going to cover my tics. And to be fair, I don't think you've actually ever ticked during the recording of a podcast or necessarily in my presence, really. But that you're upfront about it is, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to do. And I will actively use my platform to represent people in a positive way. So why not do that as a celebrity? Why not do that if you've got...
Look, you've got so much more power and influence. My mum, because the other thing that I'm upfront about is being assaulted by a physiotherapist. It's been in the news and things like that. And I'm doing lots of work around violence against women and girls and making sure that no other woman is hurt in the same way as myself and the other victims. It will continue to happen, I'm sure. But I'm trying to make sure it doesn't, or we make it as difficult as possible. And in the news article about it on the BBC, it said that I had Tourette's syndrome. And that was why I was targeted, by the way, because I had mental health issues plus Tourette's. He only targeted people with mental health issues. And my mum said, what about your new job, finding out that you've got Tourette's? And I was like, Mum, we live in a different age now. And if they don't want me because of my Tourette's, I don't want to work for them. It's as simple as that. Like, why would I want to? That does move us quite nicely. We've gone on a bit of a tirade. But the Fonagy review on ADHD and autism diagnosis, there's been an interim report published 1st of April, commissioned by Wes Streeting, who is the Redbridge MP. And the tabloid framing of it is young people incentivised to be diagnosed. The actual report is a lot more careful than that. So the report
Is that the title of the report?
No. The title is, I've just got like the Fonagy review. The report distinguishes between population prevalence, administrative prevalence, i.e. recorded diagnosis, demand and needs, and finds that ADHD and autism are the epidemiological estimates of prevalence appear broadly stable, while recorded diagnoses, referrals, and public discussion have risen. So that's interesting in itself. Is it an overdiagnosis, or is it just we're talking about it and being open more, which is kind of what we've come from? The same report notes parent-reported autism prevalence rose around 25% between 2022 and 2024, with autism-related identified need now counting for a significant share of need recorded in education. So AUDHD, which is co-occurring autism and ADHD, is increasingly recognised, and people find that their experiences do not fit neatly within autism and ADHD into either the kind of diagnostic criteria, which delays diagnosis and support. And the central diagnosis of the diagnosis problem is when support is tied tightly to diagnostic labels, demand for diagnoses will rise. So the idea of early help being another thing, actually, do we need to wait for a diagnosis before we provide support? Yeah, so quite a lot to kind of go for that. But also the timing. So just before a SEND consultation that proposes halving educational healthcare plans and replacing them with non-statutory ISPs for most children. Are the two narratives separate, or are they doing political work for one another, is my kind of question to you.
So just to go back, before we started recording, we had a very quick chat about all of this. And one of the things that we sort of agreed on was that there was a point where the language wasn't there. And we talked earlier on about how SEMH, for example, is something that we've talked more and more about in the last 10, 12 years or so.
Social, emotional, mental health. Before that, emotional behavioural difficulties, and then behavioural, emotional, social difficulties. So we keep on playing with these acronyms.
Yeah, but ultimately, much of this. And I'll be careful what I'm saying now. I am not saying that these are modern constructs in terms of conditions. What I'm saying is we understand these conditions now far better than we ever did in the past. And we have the terms for them. We have the learning from them, the strategies, the understanding. And we have woven that into the education fabric the more we learn about SEND. So it's only natural that it's a bigger part of the landscape than it ever was in the past, which lends itself to why we're getting more and more adult diagnosis, because when those adults were at school, we didn't give it the same spotlight. We didn't talk a lot about SEND unless it was really, really specific. And I guess what we're talking about is children who would have been identified for special school in the past. But there were lots of people who would have had undiagnosed needs who don't find out until they've reached adulthood and are finding out now as the growth. So you have that, I think, and I think over time that will change even more so, because we'll understand more needs even better. We'll understand nuances. You've talked there about dual diagnosis of needs where it doesn't quite naturally or neatly fit into one box. Well, by definition, we'll have a term for that in the future. We'll have a diagnosis specific to that set of needs and to other nuanced set of needs. That's just the nature of how science and psychology and understanding the human psyche develops.
But also with girls in particular being underreported and underdiagnosed, and we're having a better understanding about how girls and women might present in terms of the autistic spectrum, whereas it's a very male-dominated kind of perspective in psychiatry, and kind of that's changed enormously. And I think for the positive as well, that actually understanding girls' needs better and how they may present with ADHD or autism.
Because that's the other thing, isn't it? It's about presentation.
Yeah, it's what you
have to. Yeah, you have to recognise the symptoms before you can diagnose. And certain children, certain groups, won't necessarily show the same symptoms. And again, that's what we learn as we go along. You talked about politics coming into that, and is that linked to the idea of getting rid of EHCPs or changing EHCPs?
Yeah, it's just the idea. There seems to be a lot of discussions about overdiagnosis as well. So I spoke a couple of weeks ago about Thrift's piece on autism overdiagnosis. Then we've got the Fonagy review, but you've also got the SEND white paper. And there seems to be a lot of interplay about conversations about overdiagnosis, stretching the system, and so on. And I'm wondering whether or not these conversations are really as separate as what they're presenting, or are they all feeding into one another in terms of that kind of political landscape of reducing educational healthcare plans and replacing them with the non-statutory individual support plans? I don't know. It's a question. I'm quite cynical, I think, about how things might have an interplay that we don't necessarily realise, but also how it's particularly kind of discussed within media as well, and how, unless you're living through it, I think, and you're just reading newspaper reports, how that might shape your thinking. So I know that my youngest, Zed, is meant to be on the pathway for an autism diagnosis, but we've been waiting for a year. I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think as she gets older, it might be better to understand her needs and how she presents as she gets older. But, you know, she's never eaten, well, I say she's never eaten food. She will now put hummus in her mouth, and she will hamster carrot in her mouth and things like that. But she relies on liquid for her nutrition. And wouldn't the diagnosis of autism help me parent her? Probably not. Would it help me get the right pathway for support for her externally? Yes, it would. Because at the moment, we're just kind of working with an unknown. Yes, Zed doesn't eat food, but it's an unknown. Whereas if it's Zed doesn't eat food because she has sensory issues, and this is what it means for her, then school, nursery may provide different kind of bits for her that's supportive. But actually, the nursery does really well with her anyway, even without a diagnosis. And I parent her in the same way that I'd parent her regardless.
So I was thinking about what that means in terms of overdiagnose. And I'm reminded of my own comments about both Ofsted outcomes. Bear with me, you'll see where this is going. Both Ofsted outcomes and GCSE grades, where we cap who can have the top grades in both Ofsted and GCSEs. And my point that I made was, well, surely if you've met the descriptor, you should be allowed to have that grade. Who is it? Who, you know, who gets to decide what the percentage is?
You always have people that fail a subject if that's how you mark it.
Exactly. You know, and that's how averages work. In order for something to be above the average, others have to be below the average. So who comes up with that arbitrary idea? But can that really be the case when it comes to SEND diagnosis? Is that what we mean by overdiagnose? But then I got thinking about my own child as you were talking about yours. So my youngest child, we know that he has lots of sensory issues, but we can manage those because we're both teachers. We've both worked with young people with special education needs. I've worked with more complex special education needs, particularly more recently. So sensory things are bread and butter. Also, I understand that he needs things explained to him and he needs to understand why things are going to happen. Not a lot, you know, he does quite well independently. And he thrives in a mainstream primary school, albeit some things are a bit challenging for him. Not the work. Academically, he's very bright. Some of the social things he deals with. Yeah, friendships are okay, actually. He has great friendship groups. He has an issue with the sense of justice. He can't understand why something might... And I'll give you an example. One morning, very challenging that morning, because there were children playing football on the playground. Now, the playground, his classrooms are right on that playground. Yeah. And the parents gather on one end of the playground to drop the children off at the designated time. Teacher comes out, everyone goes in. But a lot of children were playing football on that playground. And it's actually quite irritating to everybody. The parents get irritated by it. Balls come flying at everybody. My child in particular gets irritated by it. He's not interested in football. And this to him is an irritation because it's taken up the whole space, where he'd rather have it a little bit quieter. And he overhears a comment from a parent, which is that, you know, really they shouldn't be doing that. And then he overhears a comment a bit later from a teacher who says, no, it would be great if the children weren't doing that. They shouldn't really be playing football like that. I can see how frustrating and irritating it is. In his head, he believes it's the wrong as a result of those two adult conversations. So at break time, he goes out and he confiscates all the football.
Becomes a teacher.
But he does it. He gets then into bother because it has to explain to him, well, you can't take their footballs away. But in his head, he's gone, yeah, but you've said to me they shouldn't be doing it. So I've gone and done it for you. I've acted out. Exactly.
I'm involved with it. I
And
like
that's his
it.
sense of justice.
Yeah, fair
Yeah.
sense of justice. And but also him taking up the role of I am the justice maker.
Absolutely.
Judge
But
Dredd.
all that considered, he is going to be, he's caring, he's sensitive,
He's
you know,
lovely.
he's lovely. So all that considered, he's going to be a very well-rounded young person. Yet we know he's probably got traits of ADHD and also of autism. Do I really need a diagnosis for him in order to know where the boundaries with him are, what the work is that we need to do with him? Is that necessary? Is that what we mean by overdiagnosis, when we know that perhaps a child could be given a diagnosis, but do they need to have it?
But on the flip side, when he's older, he may really want that in order to better understand his own behaviour.
Possibly.
But then, does it matter if he gets it when he's older or when he's younger? But then, yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think as a parent, we try and walk a fine line of making sure that our children get all the support they need, but also being acutely aware of the kind of delays that exist in our NHS system as well.
But that's the other thing. So we've had a letter through saying that he will be assessed.
Okay.
Am I taking up a place in the system, slowing down the system by having a child assessed?
You're just as deserving as other children. Like, your child is just as deserving to be assessed. Like, I know what you mean.
I don't disagree with that.
I kind of get it. Like, when my daughters were diagnosed with cerebral palsy, my twins, which they don't think is the right diagnosis anymore, they think there's a syndrome across my younger 3 children. I'm not convinced, actually, but anyway, I did think, when they got a little bit of physio, or when they were joining the third sector charity Step and Learn, that am I holding up a space for another child that might need it? But then also, I know that early intervention is really, really important, and this is the only place I can get the support. But it did mean that as soon as my children were able to walk, we stopped going. We're like, we can do these exercises at home now, and we want to make sure, especially if it's 2 of them, that other children with more severe needs gets that kind of early intervention as well. So I think it's equally, how do you lock into that system, but also when do you step out of that system? And I think the reality is, it's really, there's so many kind of locking parts, and it's difficult, isn't it? It's really difficult. But if you're on a waiting list, don't worry, it will be 18 months before anyone sees you anyway.
But you see, you said that there. You said you're waiting on a pathway for your youngest. But so's my child. And is my child holding up? I know it's different because obviously we're in completely different parts of the country. And these things do happen on an original basis.
But your child is just as deserving as mine. I mean, mine has perhaps more needs, but she's younger anyway.
He is, but we're not going to resolve anything.
No.
Yes, it might be great for him to have that, and it might be something he would want later in life. And in some ways, I've also thought about it, because he can lose it a little bit when he doesn't understand things. And I don't ever want him labelled as the naughty child, and maybe a diagnosis supports them. But actually, if you're worth anything in education, you would understand that, and you wouldn't label him as a naughty child. You just understand his needs, because that's what we should all be doing. So for that reason, it feels like, yes, get it, but maybe at a time when we don't need to rush to it. And if we have to wait longer to get it, so that those with greater needs get it sooner, great, that's fine. I think that's okay. I just don't want to, again, be holding up a place in the system for somebody who probably needs that more than he does. It's not going to tell us anything new.
No.
It might be supportive in the long run, but right now it's not going to solve anything for him. Because we will do that, us and the education professionals who work with him.
So, Matt, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all that you have. I think sometimes talking about our children's needs can leave us feeling quite vulnerable and judged by others as well. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, look, I've only reciprocated the sort of thing you do. You talk about your children often in a way that is both positive, but that's also typifies or exemplifies your point. So, yeah, I'm only, I'm throwing in. My children would hate it if they knew I was talking about.
Oh, well, that's why we don't use our children's names either.
No.
Call them, yours are MT, aren't they? Mine's Z. What is it?
You've got
AIZ.
It's good that you can remember them.
I can barely remember my children's names. We go through this cycle of calling them Z. Just like this whole cycle of what child am I talking to?
Every parent does that.
Yeah.
My parents did it. We do it. You go through every yep. You go through each name before you, and often you get the correct name last. Yeah. That's just something that's happened to every parent. The history of time. Thank you to those of you who have joined us, and thank you to those who return. Look at the show notes. We've got ways to contact, ways to get involved, ways to communicate with us. And obviously, we do chapter each one of these episodes. I do that to great detail just to show when the geeky bits are and when we make the jump to education. So thank you. If you've made it to this point, well done you. And try and bring 2 or 3 friends along next time. So there's nothing left to do other than to say,
I'm Sarah Johnson.
and I'm Matt Morris, and we have
Nothing to bring.